Hello everyone. Today's video is going to be about everyone's favourite student grade watercolours, Winsor Newton Cotman. It was a bit difficult to keep a straight face while saying that. Cotman is definitely a paint that divides a lot of opinions. I see many people on the internet describing it as chalky or weakly pigmented or hard to rewet, but at the same time I see many people using it without any problems. Some certain colours are great and they use them alongside their artist grade watercolours. I even read some professional painters using it. So here in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the Cotman colours that I have and seeing how they compare with my artist grade Rembrandt watercolours. My selection of Cotman paints is pretty limited. It's just 6 of the main colours from my usual landscape palette. These are the 6 colours that I would use in pretty much every landscape I paint. The other colours I would sometimes use are lemon yellow, burnt sienna and sometimes cadmium red. Okay, so let's look at the Cotman watercolours. First up is yellow ochre, pigment PY42. This is an opaque colour. If you can see in the bottom left of each of the Cotman boxes, there's a letter. And this one has an O, which means the paint is either opaque or semi-opaque. And the T means the paint is either transparent or semi-transparent. Alright, the next is intense blue, which is pigment PB15. This is Cotman's version of phthalo blue-green shade, which is PB15-3. I usually prefer the red shade, to be honest. But the Cotman only have the green shade available. Okay, next is the cobalt blue hue. When a paint is a hue, it means it's a mixture of pigments made to approximate another colour. So this is usually because the genuine pigment is either expensive, toxic or not available anymore. So their cobalt blue hue is made from ultramarine and a white. Okay, next up is light red, which is PR101. Then Indian red, which is also PR101. And finally, Payne's grey. This is pigment PBK7, PB29 and PB15. Okay, that's all of the Cotman painted out now. So now I'm going to paint out the Rembrandt and see how they compare. So first again is the yellow ochre, pigment PY43 and PY42. PY42 is the synthetic iron oxide pigment and PY43 is the organic. I'm not sure why they mix both together. Next is the phthalo blue red shade, pigment PB15. According to handprint.com, this is a PB15-1. Though on the tube it just says PB15. The difference between this and the green shade doesn't look a lot, but I just much prefer it. So now onto the cobalt blue. This is the genuine cobalt blue pigment, which is PB28. This is actually one of my favourite blues, though it can be quite expensive. I probably don't need it in the palette, but I just particularly like it in skies. I like the granulation. Okay, now the light red, which is PR101. PR101 is a cheap pigment, so there might not be a whole lot of difference between the student grade and the artist grade. We'll see. So next is Indian red, PR101 and PR264. This is actually my favourite red. The Cotman is a single pigment, PR101, whereas the Rembrandt is a 2-pigment mix. It has PR264 mixed in with it, so I guess it should be more red than the Cotman. And the final colour is Payne's grey, which is PBK6 and PB15. Okay, so that's both brands painted out now. Right away I can see a big difference in 2 of the paints. The cobalt blue hue and the cobalt blue look very different. Though I did paint the Rembrandt PB28 a bit light, I think. The Cotman looks more opaque as well. That's probably due to the white that's in it. Yeah, the Indian reds are different as well. I guess the Rembrandt is much richer because it's got the PR264 mixed in. Though I quite like the Cotman one as well. Again, it's a little bit more opaque than the Rembrandt. And I think also the Payne's Grey is a bit more opaque too. Yeah. Well, the Cotman colours seem fine, I'd say. I especially like the light red. It's almost identical to the Rembrandt, I'd say. Which is pretty good because Rembrandt have discontinued this colour, so it could be a cheap replacement. Yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with these Cotman colours. Student grade watercolours tend to have less pigment and more filler, which can make them more opaque. I can't really see any evidence of chalkiness or particularly weak pigments, but it's a pretty limited set, so I can't really comment on the other colours in the range. I've seen quite a few people complain that the ultramarine and lemon yellow are quite bad. The Cotman colours seem okay. Another difference with student grade watercolours is that they can be quite inert, wet in wet. So yeah, let's take a look and see. Right, I've never tried this kind of test before, so we'll see what happens. But I'm going to wet the inside of the square and then add a few dabs of paint and see if the paint disperses. Okay, not a whole lot of movement off the bat there from the Cotman. Rembrandt's not considered to be all that active wet in wet either. But it definitely moves more than the Cotman. Okay, I'm going to try that one more time to see if I can get the same result. So, wet the paper first. And add some phthalo blue, Payne's Grey, Indian red and cobalt blue. The Cotman's a little more active this time. Let's see how the Rembrandt does. Again, this is phthalo blue, Payne's Grey, Indian red and cobalt blue. Yeah, and again the Rembrandt seems to move quite a bit more. Now I'm going to try a quick sketch with the Cotman and see how it looks. Please excuse the glare from the lighting. I was painting this quite late at night, so... So, here's the painting when dry. Yeah, I think the paint to me seems fine. It doesn't really feel any weaker than any other paints I use, though these Cotman paints were squeezed fresh from the tube. All the other paints I use are usually dried in the palette. This for me has always been one of the biggest problems with Cotman watercolors, is that when you put them in a palette, they tend to set like a rock, especially the earth colours that I love. I did actually use Cotman for a while when I'd started to learn to paint, and it was a constant fight to get the paints to re-wet enough to get enough paint on the brush. I never use Cotman pans though, so I don't know how they are to re-wet. I'd say Cotman should really be used fresh from the tube. Though saying that, today I bought some glycerin, as I've been told it can make paints easier to re-wet. You just got to add a couple of drops when you put the paint into the palette and yeah, it should be great. So I actually got the glycerin to use with my Magello Dark Burnt Sienna, as it's the worst paint I've ever used, or at least the worst paint to rewet, I should say. But I'm going to try the glycerin with these Cotmans too. Do you think I should make a video about adding the glycerin to the watercolors? Yeah, maybe I should. If any of you know how much glycerin I should add, it would be much appreciated if you let me know. So what do you think about Cotman watercolors? Are you a lover or a hater? And what's the main reason you love or hate them? For me, if the glycerin fixes the re-wetting problem, then I would say I'm more on the love side. At least when it comes to the limited colours that I use and the way I paint. I'd still recommend Van Gogh as the best student grade paints for beginners though, as I don't really have enough experience with the other Cotman colours in the range. I'm tempted to buy the cadmium yellow pale, cadmium red and the burnt umber to see what they're like. Might be nice to have a Cotman student grade palette which matches my Rembrandt landscape palette, and then I can really see how they compare. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.